And now I would like to invite you to the panel number one, which, and now I'm going to invite another speaker, Ewa Cyrulik, Maria Urban-Tomek, and Martin Bormann. Uh, so the last paper was moved to the next session, which will be devoted to the archival documents and objects. Thank you. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to discuss the conservation of brick barracks, of masonry barracks in the former Auschwitz II Birkenau camp. And I'm going to discuss the comprehensive conservation works which are carried out by the museum staff. Speaking about large conservation projects carried out in the buildings, such institutions as museums usually decide to order such works which within external companies. We partly do it, and also mm, we uh, we decide to use our own resources. There is a team of our own works which are supposed to carry out the copy of wooden barracks. Uh, when it comes to the works carried out so far, the conservation works in the barracks with our own resources, we worked on 4 barracks, and the first of them, as part of the first project, uh, in barracks 7 and 8, and also as part of the second one, barracks 26 and 27, and currently uh, uh, we work on the conservation of the barrack number 25, and now we work on the conservation of the bathrooms and washing rooms. So the first project carried out with our own resources, comprehensive works. It was the conservation of the barrack 7 and 8, and this was the project that started in 2015 and was carried out in 2016. So why did we decide to use our own resources? Uh, this was connected with uh, two issues. So the first project, Barrack 7 and 8, was the pilot project for all built barracks uh, uh, of the building B1. Our colleague mentioned 30 residential barracks, and also we decided to carry out the first project with our own resources so that to gain experience which will be used at the conservation of some other barracks. And this was supposed to show us uh, what how to meet our objectives uh, uh, for building uh, barracks, for the brick barracks, and also it was meant to use the building as uh, as brick barracks, and this met our expectations because many things were used. So, for example, we worked on the organizational standards of the works, and also it was for the conservation of the barracks and some other elements for the protection was used. And also we worked on the identification of the building And we also, thanks to this project, we worked uh, uh, on the conservatory works, which will be discussed by Kamil Będkowski. When it comes to the organizational standards, when we started such works, we didn't know what the schedule should be and which to start with, because all the elements of the barrack are of historic character. That is why a specific chronology was of utmost importance. Also, within that project, it was decided to carry out works under tents. And when you saw what you see when visiting the Birkenau part of the camp, you see the result of some standard, of some certain standard, which is which currently doesn't concern the project carried out by our team, but it also concerns the project carried out by external companies. When it comes to the more technical solutions concerning the protection of the construction of the barracks within the first project, we worked out the methods for the protection of the foundations of the buildings, and also we prepared the methods for the preservation of the walls. Also, the methods for the wall rectifications were used, and also in that object we used some steel construction for straightening the walls, because as it was already mentioned, we really want to keep the original layout of the bricks, and that is why the conservation of the barrack was a great technical challenge. Uh, and also within the first barrack, for the first time, we used the introduction of special rods into the walls so that to strengthen them, reinforce them. For the gable walls on internal part, there were some additional layers of the concrete. We did not want to introduce the rods into that. That is why we decided for additional stabilizing structures, which was used inside the building, whereas outside there were two C-shaped rods which stabilized the gable wall, and additional there were some anchors implemented.
Other than all those technical solutions protecting the construction, which means that the barracks can be safely visited by the tourists, by the visitors, also conservation works and protection of the layers on the walls were made for the first time in our sites. We made conservation based on nanoparticles of calcium. Also, we have developed a method for disassembly and reassembly of wooden floors, which was necessary due to the work on the foundations of the barracks. When it comes to other interesting solutions worked out during this first pilot project, very interesting solution was the protection of the historical ceilings over the buildings. They are made of the rubble, and we've managed to protect them in such a way that now they are supported under a custom designed construction, such a grid, and we managed to do it without disassembly of those elements, which means that the historical assessment was retained. Another project, conservation of the following two barracks. for inmates 2628 that was carried out in 2019-2023. And as part of it, we continued the development of the further development of those technical solutions that we applied for the first project. Also, organizational standards were developed for those works, as these two barracks differed a bit from the previous ones. For example, there was a different construction of the bunk beds. That's why a major job was to design how to conserve those. And here you can see how those elements were stored after the disassembly. Then they underwent conservation and they were reinstalled once all the works connected to conservation of the walls had been completed. Let me now show you one of the most essential achievements of the project when it comes to the technical solutions, that is straightening the western gable of barrack 30 B138, the one that was most leaning of all the barracks in B1. It took us very long to complete preparations to this project, and other than this straightening construction, you can see also assembly of sensors. Other than we successfully managed to straighten that wall, we also gathered a lot of material for research. We were testing where and what force is needed, what shift of the wall occurred, and that study, that research of the behavior of that particular wall under the impact of a particular force was carried out together with the Silesian University of Technology, and now a doctorate is being written about that at that university. This is the whole process of straightening that wall that resulted from our earlier experience, also from the previous project. In the previous project, those walls were less leaning, and in this case, we had the one which was leaning furthest, and we managed to close the gap between this gable wall and the partition. That gap was closed, and the actual outer wall was straightened, moved several centimeters. Another achievement in the project was complete classification of original and later elements of the roof trussing. The work on roof trussing was conducted, and it was really conducted since the late 1950s until the time when our project started. That's why it was so crucial to have classification completed. We managed to do it with quite a high degree of precision. Let me show you here such a list. Here we have a list of all the individual elements. This analyzes all the sections, whether they were original or not. It turned out that 80% of the material is historical, that dates back to the time when the camp was in use. Hence, the idea to reinforce it by providing additional poles and additional roof ledges. Other than that, we wouldn't be able to retain the original elements, and from the point of view of functionality, they failed to meet the expectations. So An internal steel construction was applied here. Visiting Birkenau in barracks 26 and 27, you can see such a solution, thanks to which a fair share of this historical roof trussing has been retained. Other than that, we also developed work on designing conservation methods of the accrued layers,
Troszkę inne nawarstwienia się pojawiają.
because we have those in each of those barracks. Often these are various layers that are superimposed one on another, bitumic, lime, oil. So conservation of those successive layers and their consolidation is a standing challenge. As I said earlier, a major scope of works was to conserve the bunk beds. They were in a very poor condition, and we were trying to make the most conservative conservation as possible. Only add what was necessary. And a scope that really cost a lot of time in this project was connected to retouching, removal of all the vandalic accruals. Currently, we do it with our own forces, and we work on another residential barrack, and we will work on the relics of the laundry and the bathhouse. We started that project last year, and I believe that after we've completed that project, we'll have plenty of new solutions, new methods, and we will learn more about conservation of such sites. As I mentioned, this year, we decided to carry out these projects, first of all, to gain experience, and now we share our experience with businesses. We have experts, specialists who work at the museum and who can supervise businesses. We have plenty of solutions that we can apply depending on what a given site looks like. I showed you only a section of our work, our key achievements, and speaking of those purely technical solutions, there are plenty of those, and all the time we're trying to develop, we're trying to do it ever better and to seek ever new and better solutions. Thank you very much for your attention. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The presentation I'm going to show concerns wooden barracks and their conservation. Wooden barracks situated in former Auschwitz to Birkenau. And let me first tell you a few sentences about history. Birkenau, the camp, operated since 1941, and only 2 years later, in 43, Germans started installation of wooden barracks that they brought to Poland as ready-made elements, prefabricated. About 230 of them were constructed for various reasons. Only 20 of those have survived, and you can see them on the first plane. At one time, around 300 inmates could stay within. They were designed originally as horse stables, and you can see at the top picture that that's how they were used. In concentration camps, they were used mostly for housing, so for residential purposes, but they were also offices, hospitals, sanitary facilities, and warehouses. Those ones that have been preserved were mostly residential. 3 were used for sanitary purposes. The wooden barracks are often in very poor technical condition. First of all, the roof windows and construction. Same is true about elements of furnishing. Many are cracked or parts are missing. There are various deformations. And you also can see chemical corrosion. You can see it on the screen. It's unfortunately also present on the elements where we have the painted layers preserved. The screen shows you a table with data concerning the level of retention and the use of wood protection chemicals used in the past. And this also helped us to define the reasons for chemical corrosion present in 16 out of those barracks. The worst danger was in 4. They are marked orange here. There were ammonia salts used here, which caused the greatest damage. In 4 buildings, corrosion doesn't happen because ammonia salt was not here. Later, 8 barracks were conserved. Complex conservation, elimination of the reasons for damage at minimum intervention. These conservations were partially construction, partially conservation. Due to wood corrosion, we had to remove salt, and this innovative technique was developed by the museum team. Conservation of these 2 barracks, like the projects connected to the masonry barracks, were financed from the funds of Auschwitz-Birkenau Foundation. To conduct proper conservation of wooden elements, you need to dismantle the whole barrack, and you can see the Japanese paper protecting the remnants of drawings for disassembly, but also for the time of salt removal with the use of patches. This is the disassembly of the proper numbered and evidenced elements.
In wooden barracks, the works are carried out in the laboratories of the service people, and also there are construction elements which are not sustainable enough. That is why some metal reinforcement
ich wymieniać.
was installed, and thanks to that we didn't have to change anything inside them. Another method to preserve historic elements are the strengthening and the wooden wedges introduced. So the wooden elements, depending on the type, require a number of various conservation processes. Here you can see the wall panel conservation and the exchange of the degraded bonding, and also it does not protect the barrack anymore against the water coming in. So we had to exchange some of the weak elements, connecting elements, and also cracked glasses, and also it was the conservation of skylights. Within the conservation works, the non-historical layers were removed so that further conservatory works would be possible. Also, it allowed us to restore the most authentic look of the elements. When these works were carried out, we have some findings and discoveries. For example, an example of painting decoration from the period of the operation of the camp, which was under the layer of insulation materials. So some painting elements are in very poor condition of preservation. That is why they require complex and precise conservation works. For example, here we worked on consolidation and also gluing of the materials. The conservation also applies to historic metal elements which connect the wooden construction elements, and also together with the conservation of wood elements, we can see the work with these elements which stay in the area of the former camp. This is the desalation and removal of the moisture. The solution applied by the museum are non-invasive and easy to dismantle. And on the left-hand side, you can see a non-invasive steel construction, which is meant to stabilize the slanting wall of a latrine, which had to be stabilized. And also this is the conservation of the loose fragments of the detached original fragment of the wall coverage, and this is the introduction of necessary addition of the brick element of the floor, which was only necessary to stabilize the historic material. And also these are the fragments of the concrete floor made at various stages of the work, showing the shown within the consistent photographic documentation. Some important part of conservation works was the extraction of salt. That was the desalination works were introduced. So we had regular monitoring of the destruction, which helped us to observe the fast pace of the corrosion, which was seen as soon as 1 year after. So these documents, these photographs showed us that in order to stop the corrosion process, it was not only necessary to remove the fibers of the wall which were affected, but also to introduce some more invasive works. The microscopic photographs helped us to see the damage processes within the wood, and our works showed us the causes for the damage. And we can see the example of such works for the historic wood without chemical corrosion, and for also for the wood with chemical corrosion, and only in the damaged wall, in the damaged wood, you can see significant accumulation of ions which contain ammonia salts. Before the implementation of new conservation solutions, we make various types of tests, and you can see the tests for extracting the salt with the Poultice type, and we introduced the appropriate material, which was the cellulose pulp that was named Carbocell. We also verified the influence of the conservation method on the condition of the protection, and we can see a CT scan of the conservated elements. So desalination does not affect the wood condition. There are only some propagation within the continuity of the structure, which were seen already before these works started. Desalination has two forms, either with a compressed poultice or within a bath in special solution. For the benefits of this method, we had to prepare a special bath consisting of special tubes, heaters, and demineralizers. After desalination, the wood is dried, So it is used in a special wood drying panel, and you can see the photograph of the cross-cut wood, and you can see that it's absolutely safe for the wood. The wood elements with some painting layers cannot be placed in water baths. That is why they are desalinated by a few series of compresses. And this method is more time consuming and labor consuming. And in the photograph, you can see the picture of the results of the tests used with the bath, and the blue bars show the level of salt before desalination, whereas the red line is the maximum level of salt that can remain after the process. So it shows that long baths are very effective. So yellow bars, which show the content of salt after desalination, they are almost invisible. So because of the lack of time, I cannot discuss the technology, but the larger cross section, I can tell you that the longer bath should take. You can also see a fragment of a wood panel before and after conservations, and one of them was the desalination method, which helped us to stop chemical corrosion of the wood. After the complete conservation, the wood elements are assembled in Birkenau camp, and in photograph you can see the barrack upon the assembly and after its completion. A very important stage, which was mentioned here frequently, is the documentation, both written and also drawn, and photographic one. On the left-hand side, you can see the photogrammetric example, which is made before all works are started and after they are completed. And the purpose is the documentation of the very process. We use the photographs also for mapping the damage and the works performed. The changes within the objects under the influence of the works are not spectacular. That is why you cannot see the amount of work that was carried out. That is why, in conclusion, I would like to stress that every conservation of every barrack requires an individual approach and also
Dzięki niemu obiekty te są
the involvement of an interdisciplinary team, and thanks to that, the objects are properly protected and their authenticity is preserved. Thank you very much for your attention.